class we will discuss an exercise on the contribution margin. We have this data. We know that a brewery company produces this type of beer, and we have that the unitary selling price for this beer is 1.10 euros per unit, and then we know that the variable cost to realize this beer is 0.85 euros. Then we know that the fixed costs to realize the overall production is 25 euros, and we know that the quantity that is produced and sold is 80 units. The requirement of the exercise asks us to calculate if the product is profitable. If we want to understand if our beer is profitable, we need to calculate the contribution margin. And the contribution margin is calculated as the difference between the price and the variable cost. So if we consider the difference between the unitary price minus the variable cost, again the unitary value, we can have our unitary contribution margin. So if we look at the data, we will have 1.10 euros minus 0.85. That gives rise to a contribution margin of 0.25 euros per unit. This value means that every unit of our beer is able to realize a contribution margin of 0.25, which means that one unit is able to cover the variable cost, and moreover, one unit contributes also to cover the fixed cost. In addition to calculate the contribution margin in absolute terms, we can also calculate the contribution margin in percentage. In this case, we are talking about contribution margin ratio. This contribution margin ratio is calculated as the ratio between the unitary contribution margin and the price. So if we divide our contribution margin 0.25 by the price, which is 1.10, we obtain 22.73%. This value represents exactly the same meaning, so our contribution margin, but in this case it's expressed in percentage terms. This is much useful because whatever product we are selling and whatever the price we set, we can say that given 100% of our price, our bottle of beer is able to contribute to the profit for the 22% of the amount. So this is particularly useful also if we change the price or if we change the variable cost and we want to identify the profitability. Moreover, given that we have the data about the quantity, we can also calculate the impact on profit of our production. How? By calculating the net operating income. So basically, if we multiply the unitary contribution margin by the quantity, so if this value is multiplied by the quantity, we will obtain the total contribution margin. So if we multiply our 0.25 euros per unit by our quantity, we will obtain 20 euros of total contribution margin. So basically, if the company is able to sell 80 units, the total contribution margin, so the ability of our units to cover the variable costs, will be 20 euros. If from the contribution margin we deduct the fixed costs, we obtain what is defined as net operating income. So minus our fixed costs, that are 25 euros, and we will have a net operating income of minus 5 euros. This is particularly useful because we are saying that 80 units of our production are not able to cover the fixed costs. So basically, if we want to go back to our initial question, is the beer type B profitable? The answer is yes, because if we look at the unitary contribution margin, this is positive. So basically we are saying that every unit of our beer is able to cover the variable cost. The problem is that given the quantity that is produced and sold, then this quantity is not able to cover the fixed cost. So basically the profitability of our beer is positive, but then the beer is not able to provide a positive net operating income because of the amount of units that are sold by the company. So if we want to sum up everything, if we need to evaluate the profitability of a product, we need to calculate the unitary contribution margin to understand if one unit is able to cover the variable costs. Then if we have the quantity, we can calculate the impact on the profit, which is the ability of the production to cover also the fixed costs. This is not a case that in the calculation of the net operating income we think in terms of overall quantity, because we cannot consider the coverage of the fixed costs in unitary terms. So if we want to understand the impact on the net operating income, we need to reason in terms of overall quantity that is produced and sold. And then finally, we can also calculate the contribution margin ratio just to understand in percentage the incidence of the contribution margin with respect to the unitary price.